Well, there have been mounting calls for a former judge to chair a commission of inquiry into the performance of the National Prosecuting Authority. The Investigations Directorate faces ongoing scrutiny for some of the outcomes of recent cases, notably the Timothy Amatoso case in the Cholota extradition, as well as the failure to prosecute any state capture-related cases. So let's unpack this further. Retired Constitutional Court Justice Johan Kriegler is in studio with us, and there's no better person to unpack what seems to be, Judge, a crisis in the NPA. Perhaps let's start here. Was it always going to be an uphill battle for Advocate Shamila Batohi, given the history of the NPA before she came in?
It was always going to be a very, very steep uphill battle. It's a malaise that is of a long time coming and of a much wider scope than merely the NPA. NPA is a mechanism in an ongoing conveyor belt of criminal justice. And the police, the standard of investigation, the discipline of supervising investigation of cases, the presentation of cases to the prosecuting authority is the starting point of the criminal justice system's mechanism that is to end up in court. And all three, the policing, the prosecution, and the adjudication are new. They are relatively untrained, so you can expect bugs. Then on top of that you have state capture, which was a major blow. And not that we're over state capture yet. If you think of it, that the parliamentary political system at the moment is that the accused number one in state capture is the leader of the main opposition party. So the political process is also troublesome, unsettled. So Ms. Batohi's job was not only to look at the NPA, or hers was just to look at the NPA, but the NPA is in a much wider context, in a socio-political administrative context which is troubled, which is unsettled, and which will remain so for a considerable period of time, settling down after the major transition that we had in the mid-90s is a long and difficult process. To have had the very bad hiccup at the end of the first decade of the 21st century was a tragedy. It really was a very serious impediment to transition. And in the NPA, I happened to know about it. I was there with Bulelani Nguka when the NPA, this brand new structure, was going to start working in 98, 99. And we were all full of ambition and full of hope, and justifiably so. But Bulelani was worked out of office for political reasons, not administrative reasons. And since then, we have not had one single director of the national prosecution that has been left in office for the full term of office. It's never settled down. So that's the job that Shamila Batohi walked into. She's worked hard, she's battled, she has not succeeded. It's not her fault. Her successor will need superhuman powers, but much more than that. We know we can't have a person with that. It would require the whole socio-political scene assisting and working and supporting, a concentration on the fact that we have in our midst a serious disease that has to be addressed much wider than just in the NPA. An investigation by a senior judge or some other expert to advise the new directorate, certainly a good idea, certainly I believe that Ms. Montoya herself has supported the idea of having that kind of objective investigation. I think it's a good idea. I would support it.
The picture you're painting, Judge Kriegler, because the focus of my question to you was around Shamila Batoy coming in post the state capture years and Sean Abrams. But the NPA being wielded as a tool for political expediency goes back so much further than that.
Yes, yes. Unfortunately, it was even before, well, let's look at it this way. In the old regime, the prosecution was seen and was rightly seen to be, to a substantial degree, aimed at maintaining the status quo. The prosecuting authority is a tool within a larger mechanism. In the apartheid regime, it certainly functioned within that regime. In the new dispensation, you don't get rid of the old component parts of the machine overnight. There was certainly a lot of suspicion among the newcomers in the NPA towards some of the old guard. Some of the old guard certainly had a very strong tinge of apartheid about them, but at the same time they were darn good prosecutors. They had years of know-how, so you had an uneasy melding between the new and the old. Then you get on top of this, you get the new regime not strong enough to resist using the prosecution service for political ends. We know what happened at the time of the interference with the decision to prosecute the head of the police. A very, very serious interference that resulted in the resignation of a superb National Director of Public Prosecutions. Following that, we had Simelane, we had Sean Abrams. In the meantime, we had an acting regime which was certainly not ideal and undermined Ngasana to the extent that he was driven out of office. The NPA has been a limping, politically attacked institution virtually from the day it started work in 20 years ago.
Wow, that's some context that you're painting for us.
It's a bad context.
Yeah, and it explains really everything. Do you think the Commission of Inquiry, if indeed it does go ahead, there is a sense in the country, I think, that we've had these commissions of inquiry, one after the other. And, I mean, even the state capture inquiry, we've not seen any successful prosecutions there. We've spent R1 billion. What do we have to show for it? Would it be different with an inquiry into the NPA?
Well, let's recognize that commissions of inquiry are political tools to defuse national tension. The Zondo inquiry certainly did that, but it took a long, long time, and it spread its investigations very, very wide, resulting in an enormous amassing of material to be worked on by an instrument, the National Prosecuting Authority, that was limping all along. The fact that they haven't really got into this mountain of material yet is understandable but regrettable.
And frustrating.
I think it's tremendously frustrating for the undoubtedly large number of dedicated, competent people within the NPA. You know, we're looking at some 2,000 officers of the court, people who are trained to do a specialist job. Certainly there are, as Ms. Montoya indicated, there are still rotten apples in the barrel. It would be astounding if there weren't. I'm not sure that everybody understands out there precisely how individual a prosecutor's job is. it's in some respects a more responsible job than that of a judge. A judge who has made a decision has to make the decision and announce it in public and give the reasons. I found you guilty for these reasons. I found you not guilty. I believe you for the following reasons. I disbelieve that witness for reasons. A prosecutor is a professional that has to make a professional judgment based on the material that is put before it, or such further material as he or she may call for from the investigating officer or from colleagues or from elsewhere. That judgment is taken privately. Decision to prosecute on a particular charge or charges, the decision to call certain witnesses, the decision not to call other witnesses, those are all professional judgments that are made by individuals. Yes, there's supervision, there's general guidance. They go to superiors for assistance, they go to colleagues for advice. But ultimately, a prosecutor is an officer of the court that takes personal, professional, legal, ethical decisions. To influence them, to persuade them, to dissuade them is either good or bad, but in neither event is it necessarily easy. You're dealing with 2,000 people who have to take individual judgments, often on their feet, in court, on the spur of the moment on what arises. In the forensic cut and thrust, you take decisions, you make mistakes. If I may digress for a moment, for instance, the Port Elizabeth case, the disastrous extended prosecution that ended in an acquittal. It ran for many, many months, and it ran for years, and with at least 2 substantive sets of prosecutors.
You're talking about the Timothy Amatoso case, Judge Kriegler?
Yes. For a new team of prosecutors to be called for in itself is a serious disruption. The case had an unhappy history for a long time, based on many decisions taken at many levels, and it didn't work, and it's not surprising that it didn't work. I'm not necessarily saying that the prosecution's decision to appeal the acquittal is not well-founded. One doesn't know. But the atmosphere in the court was wrong for a long time.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to change that. It's very difficult for inexperienced prosecutors to change that. In fact, in some respects, it's just about impossible. If you've got away on the wrong foot with the wrong judge, it takes a great deal of hard work from very skilled people to correct that.
Yeah, and I mean, the judge had some seriously scathing things to say about the prosecution in the Timothy Amatoso case.
There was a personality clash, one can see that.
Yes. Judge Kriegler, I want to ask you, you've spoken to us about this conveyor belt of the system of justice, police, the NPA, the courts, investigations, forensics. It's a whole system. The NPA doesn't operate in as an island. You were Justice of the Constitutional Court from 1994, so you were one of the first appointed Concord justices. If you were to look back now on the legacy of the judiciary since democracy, are you satisfied? Or how do you feel about? I know that's a very loaded question, but you've got the history, you've got the institutional knowledge. You know what we intended to do in 1994, what the hope was. It's now 2025.
I chuckled when you formulated the question, because it's an impossible question to answer. Of course, I am satisfied to some extent. I am, at the same time, entirely dissatisfied by many other aspects. But the point is this, that it's an illusion to think that we came from apartheid into human rights and the new South Africa, and that was an event. The light went up, and wow, we're on the sunny uplands. Democracy is a job. It's a process. The human rights administration is an ongoing exercise in which, God willing, we get better. And we will have pitfalls. At the moment, we're in a not a good place. I think everybody agrees that socio-politically, in terms of the criminal justice system, foreign affairs, all of them seem to be a little bit wonky at the moment. We've been in worse places. We were in an infinitely worse place 30 years ago. It'll get better. It'll get better to the extent that all of us work hard. That is why, for instance, in the case of the National Prosecuting Authority, it's a job for everybody. It's a good idea to get a former judge there, but it's not only for the judiciary and the NPA to work at the restoration. It's a much broader general administrative political enterprise that will see that it gets better. So, yes, in some respects, we've done nicely. In other respects, we haven't done nicely at all.
Judge Johan Kriegler, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for coming into studio.